If you're surprised to see me sitting here this evening, you're no more surprised than I am. Kusla Sara was supposed to be teaching here this evening, but unfortunately she's rather unwell and unable to do the class, so that's why I'm here. What happened was at 11 o'clock this morning I was minding my own business, expecting to spend this evening reading my book, very gripping account of the Roman Empire by Tom Holland called Pax. Highly recommended if you're interested in that sort of thing. But here I am, instead, trying to teach you the Holy Dharma. Actually, it's my favourite thing to do, so it wasn't a big conflict. I said, sure, I'll do it. Didn't think any more about it, and then later in the afternoon I thought, well, I better start thinking about what I'm going to tell you this evening. And this is when we come to the really exciting part of the evening, because I have no idea. Well, that's a bit of a fib. I've got a rough plan, but I'm just going to be winging it in the second half of the class, and I hope you find it engaging and entertaining. So that's why I'm here. Actually, responding to a need like that when someone's ill and when someone has to drop off from teaching is something I've done a lot in my life, partly because it's a practice in itself. Well, for those of us who are order members, those of us who teach, because from time to time, inevitably, someone has to drop out, and someone sometimes has to stand in at very, very short notice. And this is an important practice, actually, because part of the Buddhist path involves in, well, if you really want to take it very seriously, in responding to the objective needs of any situation. So that if you see that something needs to be done, then you just do it. I can't say that I've always done that throughout the course of my life, and unfortunately too frequently I've not done it when perhaps I should have done, but in a situation like this, I'm very happy to do it indeed. But this is important because I don't know how much you know about the Dharma, how much you know about Buddhist teaching, but I don't want to assume too much, but there's a whole path that we follow, all the way from where we're at now, and you can start at any point, all the way to realizing the ideal of enlightenment. And there comes a crucial point along that path where someone becomes what's known as a stream entrant. Now, a stream entrant is someone who's gained some degree of spiritual insight. In fact, to such a degree that it's said that they have no danger of falling away from the path, falling away from their practice. And such a person will be characterized, amongst other things, by being able to respond to the objective need of any situation they find themselves in. And so that's partly why I agreed to do this evening. But actually, when it comes down to it, it's not a difficult choice for me, because there's nothing I love more than teaching the Dharma. So that's my little intro this evening. We're going to start now with some meditation. Okay, well, welcome back. So this evening, apparently, the order members who are on the team, I'm not on the team, I'm just a stand-in, as I mentioned earlier, we're going to start a new series on mindfulness. In fact, based on a book which is on sale in the bookshop. I should have brought a copy with me and forgot to do so. It's called Life with Full Attention. It's got a very bright red cover. You can't miss it. Could you go and get one very quickly? And I can show you. Then you can buy a copy afterwards if you want to. So I'll be dealing with a couple of themes from that book this evening. Themes that Kusla Sara was going to explore with you. I'm going to have to do that for her this evening. But let me just pause there until I get the book, and then I can start cutting into the material. Actually, what I'm going to be talking about are two things. What's called sati, which is a Pali word, which is usually rendered as mindfulness, but it doesn't quite. That mindfulness doesn't really quite do justice to it. It's like a lot of these technical terms that we use, they're very, very rich and full in meaning, and we try to unpack them so you can get some idea of what they mean in terms of practice and so on. So I'm going to say something about that. And the other is sampajanya, which means, well, it's usually translated to something like clear comprehension. And these two things fit together. I'll explain why later when. Is it Daniel? Brings the book back. Maybe he's having trouble identifying it. Oh, well, maybe I'll just plod on anyway. When he brings the book in, he can hold it up. I'll tell him to. So, yes. Now, here we are. Good. Just in time.
Life is full attention, right? Or
no, that was the one I meant.
This one.
Living with awareness. What did I say? Life with full attention. I didn't mean that. Okay, this is the book. It's called Living with Awareness. And it's based on a seminar which Sangharakshita gave way back in, I think, 1984, or no, it was 1982. And I was on it. And it was a wonderful seminar. It was a full exploration of very early Buddhist text called the not the Arya Pariyesana Sutta. I gave a talk on that about 4 weeks ago here. The Satipatthana Sutta. So it's a sutta or a discourse which explores the topic of sati or mindfulness. So that's going to be the starting point. So sati, as I said, is usually translated as mindfulness, but it's much, much broader than that. For most people these days, mindfulness, they have the understanding that it means being in the present. It's about presence. It's about being fully in the moment. You quite often hear people talking in this sort of way, and certainly there's some truth in that, but it's not quite the Buddhist virtue of mindfulness or metta. What am I talking about? Sati. Sati is something much bigger and broader than that. It certainly does involve being intensely aware of your own immediate experience. But there are dimensions to sati, which can be better translated as recollection or remembrance, which mindfulness just doesn't quite, as it's understood commonly at the moment, doesn't do justice to. So sati means something more like recollection. So it implies memory, remembering things. It's really about remembering. And so what that means is remembering our experience, remembering what we're doing, recollecting what we are supposed to be doing. I mean, for example, you sit down here in a meditation class or at home trying to meditate, and what happens? Your mind starts wandering. You know what you're supposed to be doing, trying to bring your attention onto the breath. But our mind has different ideas. The breath is boring. Or we get bored trying to make an effort to focus our minds on the breath. And so when that happens, we forget what we're doing. We've forgotten our purpose. Our purpose was, presumably, to sit down and focus our minds on the breath. But there are all these enticing thoughts which tease us away from it. And we have to remember to bring our attention back to the breath. We remember that we're supposed to be meditating. So you make the effort to bring your attention back onto the breath. And then what happens? The mind wanders off again. Does it not? No? Mine does. And we keep having to bring ourselves back to the breath. We keep coming to sort of remember to bring our attention back to the breath. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be thinking about, not thinking, actually, bringing my attention on the breath, focusing on the breath, being aware of the breath, rather than thinking of that lovely holiday I could go on in the spring or whatever it is. So this is what happens when we try to meditate. Our mind wanders all over the place, very frequently. But the mindfulness of breathing practice helps us to focus our minds so that we can do that less and less. The more you do this practice, the more able you are, every time you sit down to do this practice, to at least get to the end of the 10th breath with your counting. Occasionally. Maybe even several times in the course of a year. Actually, I've been doing this practice for 53 years. And I don't know, I find my mind wanders not quite as much as it used to, because I've learned over the years how to slowly tame my mind, and so that I can sit down and I can count to the end of the 10th breath several times in a row in a single practice. And I can move on from that. But it's taken me a long time to learn to do that, and a lot of practice. Meditation needs a lot of patience. But anyway, you get the idea. We recollect the fact that we're supposed to be focusing our mind on doing this thing, focusing our mind on the breath. So mindfulness is more, it's that process of constant recollection of what you're doing. And this is very important for a number of reasons. It's very important to have this kind of broader idea because, for example, memory is so important. Without memory, ethics is not possible. It's on the basis of remembrance, of remembering what we've done in the past, and sort of eventually, hopefully, able to see that our actions have consequences, and that those consequences are not always pleasant if we behave badly in some way, that makes us want to change, that we want to lead, therefore, a more ethical life. And this ethical dimension of mindfulness is implicit in Buddhist teaching. So ethics is very much bound up with mindfulness. I've recently been engaged in writing my autobiography. I've been doing this now for a few years, and it's been a very, very instructive process because I've had to go right back to the beginning of my life and write about everything of any significance that I've done, including all those things I'd rather forget about, things I'd rather not, that people didn't know that I'd done, and reflect upon that. Now, we all have these moments, and we generally don't like to share them with other people. But I'm trying my best, with some reluctance, I have to say, to bare my soul in this book. I'll tell you one story. I'll tell you this story because it had a big impact on my life. I think in a certain sense it was a turning point for me. When I was 19, I went travelling. I was a drama student at the time, but for the whole of the summer I went hitchhiking around Europe, and I eventually ended up in Greece. And in fact, in the town of Thessaloniki in northern Greece. And anyone who used to travel around Europe, as we did in those days, hitchhiking was very easy. It doesn't seem to be so possible these days, but it was very easy in those days, relatively. But it was well known by people on the road that you could sell your blood in Greece. And so many people did that. Just turn up at the local hospital and they take your blood. And in Greece, you got 500 drachmas. Greece is a much poorer country than it is, I believe, now. But then, and so I could live on a very small amount of money for quite a long time. I think it cost me £1 a day, for my hostel fee, youth hostel fee, and 3 meals, and perhaps a few other little treats besides. Anyway, 500 drachmas was like 5 days. It was an extra 5 days. So I went into the hospital, and I was shown into a room and told to sit and wait there. Very soon after I'd sat down, a man came into the room. He looked around the room, and he just pointed at me and said, "That one." In Greek, presumably. At least I'm assuming that's what he said. So he'd been brought in by a nurse or a doctor, I can't remember who. And so I was approached by this, I think it was a doctor actually. He came up to me and said, "Look, this man would like to have your blood. But let me just tell you something first of all, and that is that he's a very poor man. He can't really afford to pay you. Would you be willing to consider foregoing his payment?" And I said, "No." And I didn't like the fact that I said no, and I knew it immediately. It was perhaps forgivable, I was 19 and so on, but I really didn't need that money. But I wanted the money. I could have just given it, but I wasn't happy with that. I wanted the money. So the man looked at me somewhat despairingly, I have to say. I was told he had leukemia, and he needed a lot of, or some kind of blood cancer, and he needed a lot of blood transfusions. Now, it never occurred to me that by doing that, not immediately, it didn't occur to me, well, that might have caused him quite a lot of hardship. He couldn't afford to pay me, the doctor told me. I'm sure he meant that sincerely, but I wouldn't give it for free. And afterwards I felt very, very bad about it. But it's too late, I'd got the money, the whole thing had been done. And so I reflected upon that. And I knew that I never wanted to do anything like that ever again. How could I have been so hard-hearted? I mean, I didn't have the imagination to think that perhaps, for example, his family needed to, in order to get him the blood that he needed, may have needed to sell property or whatever. They may have needed to mortgage their home. I don't know how they got the money. But I didn't have that imagination at that time. And I felt deeply ashamed afterwards. And I never wanted to do anything like that again. And I hope I never have. I haven't sold my blood anyway, so I haven't exactly done that again. I don't know why. I don't know even why I wanted the money in a sense, because I didn't need it, and I'd already become a blood donor in this country. And of course, you didn't get paid on the NHS for giving your blood. I just wanted to do it, but in that situation, I couldn't. So the fact that impinged so strongly upon my mind made me think. Now, I wasn't a Buddhist at the time, but it was, I think for me, it was a bit of a wake-up call, a bit like, for the first time in my life, perhaps, I had a sense that my actions had consequences. And this is a fundamental sort of principle of Buddhist teaching. Actions have consequences. I mean, Buddhism doesn't have a monopoly on that idea. But it's basically what the teaching of karma is all about. You've probably heard about karma and that Buddhism teaches karma, but this is very often a misunderstood concept, because usually, very often rather, for people in the West, especially if they know nothing about Buddhism, they associate karma with fate. So if something happens to you, something unpleasant especially, you say, "Oh, well, it's just my karma." This is the sort of attitude that you'll find with many people in India today. It's my karma. In other words, it's identified with fate, and it's come to mean that in our culture. But actually, what it really means is that, well, actions have consequences. What most people in a Buddhist context mean by karma is karma vipaka. Vipaka means literally that, the consequences of actions. And so I think for me, that unfortunate incident where I acted, I think, quite meanly, awakened some sort of awareness in me about that. So there is this dimension to mindfulness. You reflect upon the things that you've done, in life. If you, for example, look back over the course of your life, I can see very clearly now, after 50 odd years of engaging in this kind of practice, just how much I've changed. But there's something else there. I've seen that my life has direction and purpose in a way that it didn't have before I started practicing Buddhism. Buddhism gave me a whole new dimension of life. When I was younger, in fact from the age of 4, I believe, certainly from a very early age, I knew I was meant to be on a stage. That's because my grandmother, way back in Middlesbrough, took me to the Middlesbrough Empire every Friday night for I don't know how many years to see the local variety show. And I loved it. But and it was a magical world for me, the theatre. And my ambition was to become a comedian. Some people say I would have succeeded, but especially my father. But he didn't mean that particularly kindly, by the way. But eventually, it became something else. It evolved, so that I eventually wanted to become an actor, not just any actor. I wanted to become a great classical actor. Despite my working class background, I started to develop an interest in that kind of theatre. And in doing that, what I wanted to do, because I saw a very, very moving performance by an actor called John Neville of Oedipus Rex, Sophocles' play. And I was so affected by his performance, and the play, of course, mustn't leave Sophocles out of it, that I felt what I wanted to do with my life was to move people in the way that he'd moved me. So that gave me some kind of higher purpose. But once I started working in the theatre, it didn't quite match my ideals, or it didn't quite fit what I thought theatre should be. And I found that I became very, very disillusioned with it. And that's why eventually I turned to Buddhism. And it was then that I found I had another purpose, a much higher purpose than merely becoming a successful actor. So now it's time to move on to this other side of mindfulness, sampajanya, or clear comprehension. Remembering your purpose, that's really what that means. Just remembering what you're doing and why you're doing it. You can apply that on a small scale, as we do with meditation, but you can apply it to the whole of your life. You believe, or you become to see, especially through meditation, that your actions do have consequences. You begin to see that more clearly. And if you look back over your life, you can see, even just a year or two of practice, you can see patterns in your behavior, patterns which perhaps, well, some of which you're not very happy with and you want to change. And you can change them. And you can change them in the light of an ideal. And that ideal, for Buddhists, of course, is the ideal of enlightenment. Ultimately, that means realizing embodying infinite compassion and transcendent wisdom. And that's the goal, ultimately, of every Buddhist. And certainly that's everything we do in this center, is trying to sort of encourage people to move in the direction of that ideal. But the ideal of enlightenment, it's not something which is realized very quickly or easily, not even on Maitreya Bandhu's course. And not that I'm trying to put it down, I'm sure he's got this method in his seeming madness. I'm sure it's going to be a wonderful course for those of you who are thinking of going on it. But enlightenment is not usually achieved that quickly. it takes lifetimes according to Buddhist tradition. I mean, I've been practicing 53 years. I'm nowhere near being enlightened. I know that. But I also know that I've changed very much for the better in relation to that ideal, trying to, become a more generous, kinder sort of human being. So remembering one's purpose, remembering what you're doing, is a very, very important aspect of mindfulness and why you're doing it. And that meaning, why you're doing what you're doing, becomes clearer when you can look back over a period of years and see where you've come from. So that's basically what we're talking about this evening. Now let's come back though to the idea of the goal of enlightenment, because that's a big goal. It's a noble goal. For most of us, it's a distant proposition. It's a realistic one, we can get there, but it might take lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, according to the tradition. But what we can do is set ourselves short-term goals. Like for instance, you may not yet have been able to have established a daily meditation practice, but you could set that as a goal. And you can help yourself by going on a retreat, of course, because that gives you an opportunity to practice meditation in a more intensive kind of environment for a few days or a week or so, and that will enable you to give you a boost so that you can then begin to meditate on a daily basis. You may then feel that you need to, or you would like to, meditate for longer than just 15, 20 minutes, half an hour than you normally do. Again, you can set yourself a goal to meditate for longer periods, and so on. You can keep setting yourself short-term goals so that when you have achieved one goal, you can set yourself a new goal, and so on. So that's how we can proceed. When I went on my first solitary retreat, that was way back in, well, certainly sometime in the mid-70s, I think, 1975, I went away for 5 weeks on my own, which was a bigger challenge than I'd realised. I'm not going to say too much about that now, but one of the things that I realised was that I was not a natural meditator. At least that's what I thought. I was not particularly gifted at meditation. I was not going to become the next Milarepa. You know who Milarepa was? Milarepa was the great Tibetan yogi who spent most of his life living in a cave high in the mountains. Well, I wasn't going to become that. I found that, as many of you may have found, that your mind wanders, and it wanders all the more freely when you're on your own. You've got fewer distractions, and you're confronted with your own immediate experience in a very big way, which is not always easy to handle. However, I did a little bit of Dharmic reading, read a little bit of Dharma on that retreat, and I read a story. It's a mythical story about the Buddha Amitabha in a previous life. The Buddha Amitabha was known as Devamitra. Many eons previous to becoming a Buddha, he was a Buddhist monk. And he realized that, well, in fact, he knew he was a long way from enlightenment, but he decided that he would just practice generosity for the rest of that life, make that his main practice for the whole of that life. And that appealed to me. I thought, giving is relatively easy. I can do that. Meditation's a bit too tough for me, but I can give. At least I can give. As a consequence of that, I moved to Norwich to set up a centre, which is still functioning there. So that was one way that I felt that I could give. Just focusing on giving for a long time really helped me. It really helped my meditation as well. Because the more skillfully you behave, the more skillful your behaviour is, the easier it is to meditate. The more ethical your life becomes, the easier it is to meditate, and so on. Anyway, maybe I'll leave it there and just open it now for questions. I've perhaps said quite enough to get started.